Every Thursday morning, shortly after 7 o'clock, a flatbed truck navigates a dusty track winding through the countryside of Kentucky, eventually stopping at the boundary of a 40-acre parcel of land. The driver refrains from sounding his horn, as it's entirely unnecessary. The proprietor of the estate is already present on her veranda, a mug of coffee warming her hands, observing the arrival. What is discharged from the vehicle is not lumber of any conventional demand. These are substantial, irregular planks of oak, their bark still clinging to the perimeters, some appearing distorted, others fractured through their centers. This is the sort of timber a commercial lumber operation deems surplus, destined for combustion, shredding, or internment. Nevertheless, with unwavering regularity, she permits these boards to be arranged along her property line as if it were an entirely ordinary occurrence. Her acquaintances have begun to pause their vehicles near her mailbox, merely to observe this peculiar ritual. No one comprehends why a 60-year-old widow would desire copious quantities of wood that a multi-million-dollar sawmill could not profitably dispose of. It is equally perplexing why she never expresses dissatisfaction, never haggles over terms, and never seeks any monetary compensation. The underlying truth, unknown to them, is that she is not accumulating discarded material. She is, in essence, amassing moments in time. If your inclinations lean towards narratives of common individuals discovering remarkable prospects in overlooked settings, you have arrived at the opportune juncture. Share with us in the comments section your current location for tonight's viewing. This collective has flourished thanks to individuals precisely like you. Now, let us unravel how a collection of cast-off oak timber transformed, unobtrusively, into a lucrative enterprise yielding 6 figures annually. Her name is Diane Holcomb, and this estate has been a fixture of her lineage since 1962. She inherited it from her late spouse, Walter, a man who dedicated 30 years to piloting a feed delivery vehicle and never once engaged with woodworking implements throughout his entire life. Upon his passing, the prevailing assumption among the local populace was that Diane would liquidate the property and relocate closer to her daughter in Lexington. Instead, she persisted in maintaining the fields she had always tended, settling the same modest property taxes, and declining 2 distinct proposals from property developers eager to section the land into residential plots. She possessed no background in carpentry, nor any prior experience in commerce. To the majority of Hartwell County, she was simply Walter's surviving spouse, a woman to whom people extended courtesy but harbored no particular curiosity. She did not operate a flamboyant vehicle, nor participate in the deliberations of the Chamber of Commerce. This underestimation, it would transpire, was the initial stroke of good fortune that she failed to recognize at the time. No one anticipated anything significant from her, which in turn meant that no one was scrutinizing her actions closely enough to impede her progress. The lumber mill was under the proprietorship of an individual named Russell Tate, who managed Tate Brothers Sawmill, situated 2 miles down the main thoroughfare. Russell was not acquainted with Diane on a personal level, but he was aware that her property featured an extensive dirt accessway, ideal for temporarily storing surplus materials. The mill processed thousands of board feet monthly, primarily for flooring installers and cabinet makers, who placed bulk orders and expected each plank to be identical to the last. When a log emerged with broad, irregular striations near its core, often the most aesthetically pleasing aspect of the tree, it simply did not conform to standard manufacturing protocols. Purchasers desired uniform boards, predictable grain patterns, and straight edges. So-called live edge slabs, those retaining the natural contour of the tree, were regarded as problematic. They necessitated extended curing durations, meticulous handling, and customers willing to invest in unique character rather than uniformity. Most commercial mills lacked the requisite patience or a sufficiently robust market for such lumber. Consequently, Russell proposed a standing arrangement. Each week, instead of incurring disposal fees for slabs that no one would purchase, Tate Brothers would transport them to her access road. In exchange, Diane would be at liberty to retain and utilize as much of the wood as she desired. This arrangement proved cost-free for the mill, liberated valuable space at their facility, and provided her with an unexpectedly inexhaustible source of complementary hardwood for a purpose yet undefined. She acquiesced, not out of a pre-existing strategy, but because Walter had once advised her never to decline free lumber, asserting that she would invariably discover a practical application for it. Little did she realize then how prescient his words would be. For the initial several months, the slabs remained in situ, gradually expelling moisture into the open air of Kentucky. It was during this period that Diane, almost serendipitously, began to comprehend the distinction between air drying and kiln drying. Kiln-dried lumber undergoes a process of heating within controlled chambers to rapidly decrease its moisture content, often within a matter of days. Air drying, conversely, is a considerably more protracted process, sometimes requiring a full year for every inch of thickness, but it tends to preserve a greater degree of the wood's inherent coloration and structural integrity. Oak, she would later discover, is particularly unforgiving. Its dense cellular structure renders it susceptible to fracturing if dried too swiftly, and its behavior varies depending on whether it is cut flat-sawn or quarter-sawn. Quarter-sawn oak, produced by cutting perpendicular to the tree's growth rings, reveals a distinctive, flecked pattern highly valued by furniture artisans. However, its production is more labor-intensive, which contributes to mills' reluctance to utilize it for high-volume, inexpensive inventory. Maple, in contrast, dries more rapidly and exhibits less dimensional change, which is precisely why mills favor it for mass production. Oak's inherent recalcitrance is precisely what lends it rarity, and rarity, Diane was beginning to perceive, often resides concealed behind inconvenience rather than genuine scarcity. Initially, none of this held logical sense for Diane. She merely observed that certain planks splintered within weeks, while others, carefully stacked with small wooden separators to promote air circulation, remained intact for months. She was learning through adverse experiences, through successive failures, the very variables that industrial kilns are engineered to meticulously regulate. Her inaugural significant undertaking in construction occurred nearly a year later. She resolved to craft a coffee table for her own living area, dedicating an entire weekend to hand-sanding a single slab. Upon finally applying a commercially procured oil finish, the wood absorbed the sealant unevenly, resulting in splotchy patches rather than a uniform sheen. She nearly abandoned the project at that point, but an elder neighbor, a retired cabinetmaker named Cecil Whitmore, happened to be passing by and noticed the scattered sanding dust on her porch. Cecil had devoted 40 years to the meticulous construction of cabinetry before being compelled into retirement by the onset of arthritis. He examined her inconsistent finish, offering no critique, but instead imparting a piece of wisdom that would resonate with her throughout her life. "Wood doesn't deceive you, Diane," he stated. "It simply reveals its truth more gradually than people do. If you pay close enough attention, it will articulate precisely what it aspires to become." He demonstrated how to seal raw oak with a light application of sanding sealer prior to applying the final finish, how the direction of the grain influences stain absorption, and how diligence, rather than innate talent, was the crucial differentiator between superior furniture and amateur craftsmanship. Her second table yielded a more satisfactory outcome, though its edges remained uneven due to a poorly sharpened blade. Cecil instructed her on the method of rectifying an edge using a router and a parallel guide, a technique she diligently practiced for weeks until her cuts achieved consistent straightness. Gradually, through a succession of errors, her woodworking skills improved. A year subsequent to that initial flawed finishing attempt, she completed a dining table for her personal use that finally possessed an intentional aesthetic. Its rich amber hues, a smooth hand-rubbed oil finish, and the natural live edge expertly polished rather than left rough. A friend visiting for an evening meal, a schoolteacher named Marcia Doyle, inquired if Diane would consider fabricating a similar piece for her household. Diane agreed, stipulating a price barely sufficient to cover the cost of materials, primarily to ascertain if she could replicate the result. She could. Marcia's table spurred the creation of a photographic representation posted online, which subsequently prompted a telephone inquiry from a woman residing in Lexington, followed by another from a young couple undertaking the renovation of a farmhouse on the outskirts of Bardstown. Diane eschewed any form of advertisement. She maintained no online presence, initiated no marketing campaigns, and never once referred to herself as a business proprietor. She simply imbued each creation with the same unhurried craftsmanship that Cecil had imparted, and her clientele recognized the palpable difference between mass-produced items and objects fashioned with meticulous attention. One discerning client, after collecting a completed console table, remarked candidly, "This piece feels as though it already possesses a narrative." Diane recognized, almost inadvertently, that it was precisely this inherent story that patrons were willing to pay for. The pivotal turning point arrived approximately 3 years after the initial consignment of oak slabs. Renee Castellano, an interior designer hailing from Nashville, was actively seeking a distinctive reception desk for a boutique hotel client and chanced upon images of Diane's handiwork. Renee made a personal excursion to Diane's location, anticipating a modest artisan's workshop. Instead, she encountered substantial piles of curing oak, a converted barn serving as her workshop, and a woman who discussed wood grain with the same nuanced appreciation a sommelier employs when evaluating wine. Renee placed an order for 6 bespoke pieces. This represented the most significant commission Diane had ever undertaken, and it daunted her considerably. She had underestimated the considerable time investment required for 6 large-scale constructions. Working in isolation, she fell behind her projected schedule, sacrificing sleep and narrowly averting the deadline. It was Cecil, by then in his 80s, who gently reminded her of a fundamental truth. One is not obligated to perform every task independently to achieve a high standard of execution. She engaged the services of a local craftsman, a younger man named Jake Sutton, who had been rendered jobless from a furniture factory in a neighboring county. Jake brought efficiency to the process. Diane contributed her discerning judgment. In collaboration, they successfully completed Renee's commission within the stipulated time frame. This hotel project subsequently led to a second commission from a boutique hotel chain expanding across 3 states, facilitated by a buyer named Tom Bridger, who specifically requested the Oak Woman from Kentucky. Within 4 years of that initial wood delivery, Diane's workshop, still situated on the same stretch of land where Tate Brothers had once deposited their rejected planks every Thursday, had evolved into an enterprise generating an annual revenue exceeding 6 figures. She continues to procure her raw materials from the same mill. Russell Tate still makes a personal call when an oak log yields wide, irregular slabs that no one else finds desirable. It is Thursday morning once more. A flatbed truck proceeds down the gravel path precisely as it has for years. Diane stands on her porch, coffee in hand, observing the driver as he unloads thick, uneven oak slabs along the fence line. Nothing about the material itself has undergone transformation. It remains rejected, imperfect, and universally regarded as waste by all except for her. What has fundamentally changed is Diane. Her narrative is not intrinsically about lumber. It is about the consequences of an individual's decision to refuse to dismiss something merely because it appears unrefined, unfinished, or inconvenient. True value rarely announces its presence ostentatiously. It lies in wait beneath a surface that most individuals neglect to explore. As Diane frequently recounts to visitors inquiring about the genesis of her enterprise, echoing a sentiment once articulated by George Washington Carver, "When you can perform the ordinary tasks of life in an extraordinary manner, you will capture the attention of the world." She did not unearth a concealed fortune within oak. Rather, she discovered it through perseverance, through embracing setbacks, through the quiet wisdom imparted by an elder cabinetmaker, and through the unwavering resolve to consistently show up every single Thursday until the wider world finally recognized the inherent worth she had perceived all along.